Hello, welcome to Free Will, Science, and Religion. I'm Chandler Klebs, and I'm here with George Ortega, and today we're going to talk about randomness and perhaps some of the different meanings of randomness and how this leads to a lot of confusion. People get confused between the randomness of a causality, which people try to claim exists, and there's randomness as in unintentional or randomness as simply meaning that something's unpredictable. But we can talk about each of these things and what the implications are when talking about each kind of randomness. So, George, we often in this podcast we talk about how even randomness doesn't give us any free will, because if something was uncaused, that sense of random, then we're not the cause of it, so it can't be willed by us. And similarly, if something was random, meaning it's unpredictable, then why can't we predict it? And if we can't predict it, we can know that we're not the one causing it either.
Right, but let's go beyond that, Chandler, because basically, yes, fine. A lot of people accept that both causality and randomness refute free will. But, for example, I was leading a meetup group in Manhattan earlier today, and because people actually believe there's such a thing as true randomness, they're not able to appreciate causality. They're not able to appreciate how impossible free will is. And again, even like, this podcast is about truth, about, trying to explain the nature of reality as it really is. And so this myth, this illusion of randomness is, I don't think it's as harmful as the free will illusion, but I think it's something that our world needs to overcome. Basically, people are saying that things happen without a cause. That's an absurd contention.
Yes, it is absurd. And I would say that part of the problem is that it keeps people from questioning why things happen. Because if you just assume that something happens for no reason, well, then there's no reason to study it. There's no reason to use any scientific method, no reason to experiment, no reason to ask questions.
Right, but I mean, more fundamental, fine, because like we can relate it to the free will thing and the practicality, but this is more a matter of basic fundamental knowledge. Some people assert that things are quote unquote random in the strong sense of being uncaused. That assertion is completely without evidence. It's incoherent. I mean, like it's incoherent in the sense, like, for example, you could like a pig flying with wings is coherent, but it's not really coherent in any like realistic sense. This idea of things happening that are not caused, basically the way to understand how such a prospect cannot be, why it's impossible, is like for something to happen without a cause would mean that it would have to happen without the universe having existed before it happened, because with anything that happens, it doesn't matter what it is, anything big, small, the size of a galaxy, the size of an atom, with anything that happens, the ultimate and fundamental cause of it is always the state of the universe at the preceding moment. So again, like for somebody to posit that something is happening without a cause is akin to positing that the universe didn't exist before it happened, and that's why it's incoherent. That's why it's such an absurd contention.
I agree, George. It's absolutely absurd. And moreover, it conflicts with things that people believe in general. People ask questions about why something happened. People don't just assume things happen for no reason. I mean, sometimes they do because they believe in this randomness, but it doesn't make sense because, like what you're saying, is if something has no cause, then it means it cannot it has to be independent of everything else that exists. It can't be caused by gravity, light, heat, whatever the physics of the universe. It can't be caused by anything. So it would literally have to pop out of nowhere. Um, and this is where it gets problematic because there can't be evidence of such a thing. Now, even if we were to suppose that there was such a thing as things just happening, things being created or destroyed without a cause, there would of course be no evidence of such a thing, because evidence would be about what caused something. There would have to be some way of finding out why something happened, and if there is no why, then there's absolutely no way to investigate it.
Chandler, that's an excellent point. I think a major mistake that people make in this is that they conclude, if we haven't found a cause, there is no cause. I mean, that is so unscientific. That is so irrational. There are so many processes, so many aspects of science that that the causes were not found for them for hundreds of years, and there's still in science, if you get to any kind of like specific phenomena in science, you can just basically take it down to a fundamental level where whether it's gravity or electromagnetism or whatever it is, at its most fundamental level, we don't know why something is happening, why gravity attracts, why electromagnetism acts the way it is, what's causing it to behave. We can apply this to pretty much anything we know about the universe. We can go to a level where we're going to like have to acknowledge that we don't know what's causing the phenomenon that is so apparent. So I mean, like it's just very clear that that basically not knowing what the cause of something is no basis for asserting that that whatever actually has no cause.
Yeah, and aside from the fact that there can be no basis for asserting that there's no cause, it's also not very helpful to us. I mean, just from a practical perspective, I mean, the reason, for example, they perform an autopsy on someone who died, if they is because if they don't know the cause of death, they want to know what it was in general. It can make certain differences. Um, to know, because if something happens that you don't like, you need to know what the cause of it was so that you can prevent it from happening in the future. So just for practicality, you have to identify causes if possible.
Well, yes, but again, we're dealing with the we're dealing with pragmatic, practical applications. But this is more fundamental. This is really about what is and what isn't according to logic, according to science, according to empiricism. You know, it's just we don't need to invoke any kind of like a practical purpose for just their understanding that that everything has to be caused. I mean, we need to address this at the fundamental level that that everything has to be caused because everything we know is caused. Because like again, to posit that something is not caused is to posit that the universe did not exist before whatever happened. And then that's it's a simple point, just like it's simple to kind of like explain that both causality and acausality prohibit free will, or even that just cause and effect, causality prohibits free will. But even though it's a simple point, it escapes a lot of people. So we just have to keep going over it and over it until perhaps people are ready to hear it, or maybe we need to get better and better at explaining it in different ways that will resonate, that will help people to finally understand.
Right. So what you want to do is you want to talk about it more from a truth perspective, and just talk about this idea as to how many people believe it, and is there any basis at all for trying to say that literally something happens without it being caused, without a universe existing in order to make it possible to happen.
Exactly. Some people will say, for example, that natural selection is random, evolution is a random process. That is such nonsense. All that, basically, we may not know how some of evolution works, how some of natural selection works. But to posit that just because we don't know its mechanism, it must be random, that's it's not science. It's not science and it's not logic.
Well, yeah, I mean that's like looking at a chess game between two people, and if you don't know the rules of chess, you'll just see two people moving a bunch of pieces on a board and call it random. That's what you'll do if you don't know how the game of chess works. So it's simply a matter of us not knowing. It's not a matter of things actually happening for no reason.
Right. And then the question becomes, I mean, like, this isn't a difficult concept. I mean, like, you have to ask yourself, why or how do people believe in randomness? This idea that things happen without a cause. What I mean, like, even like, you go to quantum mechanics and the Heisenberg uncertainty principle and Copenhagen interpretation. I mean, they say a lot of nonsense. There they say, for example, that a particle. Some of them say that a particle doesn't exist until it's measured. That's nonsense. That people can buy into that stuff is bewildering. It's almost as amazing as that that people don't understand that free will is completely impossible.
Yeah, or like saying that the particle is in multiple locations at the same time, like Michio Kaku did.
Exactly, exactly. I mean, sometimes they're referring to the wave aspect of a particle that, in a certain sense, is not localized to one specific point, but that's not saying like that the particle is in more than one place at a time. It's saying that the particle occupies, kind of like a wider area than a single point, through its wave function. So but again, like it's the good thing, Chandler, about this whole free will topic is that it helps people learn how to think. It helps people learn how to think about the free will issue. It helps people learn how to think about causality, and hopefully it can help people learn how to think about randomness and understand, how completely absurd the notion is.
Yeah, well, here's an interesting thought, George. Is it, yes, I agree with you first that it does teach people how to think. And there's something that I think people fear. I think because people hold onto their free will belief, they like to think of other events that are not them as being random, but they like to think of themselves as being intentional agents who don't do random things. So for them, random might be the equivalent of unconscious, something that they can consciously control, but which can't control them. But here's what I think might be their fear, that for them it would be easier psychologically for them to say that the behavior of some kind of subatomic particles is random or uncaused, rather than to think that maybe those particles are alive and thinking and doing things intentionally. Which of those two ideas sound better to you?
Wait, what are the two ideas?
Okay, one idea is the kind that people are commonly promoting, the idea that these particles do things randomly for no reason. They're uncaused. And the other idea, which you never hear of this, but I just kind of said it, is that these particles are alive and intentionally do things.
Well, I mean, here the thing is, I mean, like a particle doesn't have to be quote unquote alive to do things. I mean, all matter is governed by the laws of nature. These laws of energy and the forces that compel what you call it particles to behave. I mean, we don't really have to invoke animism or things being alive to just demonstrate that everything is governed by forces, and that's actually another way of understanding, why randomness just doesn't make sense.
True, because things happen whether consciousness is included or not. But I think for many people, their notion of randomness is tied in with the idea of something happening unintentionally. Because they might mean randomness in an unintentional sense, and then they think of other things that are not random as intentional or purposeful by some conscious being. So, for example, here's a common misunderstanding. A lot of theists, for example, they view everything as an intentional, willed, chosen act by God, for example. That's how, like, a theist worldview looks at things. And that's something, by experience of the people I've talked to, everything's intentional with them. Whereas, and I happen to disagree with the other side, which the majority of atheists, they tend to do this thing like, oh, it's no, it's not intentional, it just happens randomly. They try to say it that way. And I think both of them have something wrong here because I think what they're trying, scientific, materialist, non-theistic type of people, they're trying to get out the message that things can happen without being intended by a deity. They're trying to get that message out there, which is true. However, the problem with that is that the way they say it may come across as promoting the idea of a causality. And I think that's where they went wrong.
Well, the other part of that, Chandler, is that you don't have to invoke a deity to explain intentionality. In other words, like our universe, everything within our universe is governed by the laws of nature. You know, the four fundamental forces, and how, you know, the various laws act on matter. And, you know, basically we are governed by, and we're doing what the universe, for whatever reason, intends. I mean, the laws of nature are intentions. I mean, they're basically like, you know, they intend, for example, gravity intends for forces, for matter to come together. You know, basically, you know, you've got these forces that intend to move whatever they're forcing, whatever they're acting upon. And now, of course, like, you know, we can't know why they're intending that. We can't know, but obviously, you know, the behind a law of nature as vast as gravity, you know, you have to concede and understand that gravity's intention, quote unquote, is to bring matter together. You know, otherwise you'd have to come up with a use of intention that is completely anthropomorphic, that's just like just limited to human beings, and that's, you know, that doesn't seem very scientific.
Right, I agree. See, here's the deal is that people when they think of something intentional, when they think of intention or reason or purpose, the problem is that they have a tendency to anthropomorphize it and think of it as some kind of well thought out plan or something like that. A fire, for example, if it catches on to a building, in time, it's only a matter of time. If it's not put out, it will consume that whole building if it's made out of wood. If it's not fireproof, it will consume every part of it. However, it's kind of interesting. There's different ways of looking at it. One person might say, well, that's what fire does. It consumes fuel and it will spread to all the wood and burn it up. Another person might anthropomorphize the fire and say, well, this fire wants to burn all this stuff, and so it travels intentionally. And so one person is invoking a consciousness of the fire. The other person might just explain some scientific reason why fire behaves a certain way. But in reality, the house is burning down while these people discuss it.
Right. And the other part of this is, just as some people, some scientists even, will say, well, you know, we don't know what's causing something, so it can't have a cause. Then, you know, the equivalent of that related to intentionality is like, well, we don't know what's intending something, so it can't be intended. And naturally, we limit this intention, this concept of intention, to biological beings like ourselves, forgetting that we have no free will, forgetting that absolutely nothing is up to us, and nothing we do is because we're, quote unquote, freely willing to do it. So, you know, just as you have to ascribe human action to something outside of a human, you have to ascribe intentionality to basically, you know, pretty much to anything. I mean, like, yeah, basically, a lot of times in science, again, a concept is defined and understood so narrowly that it really just basically misses the point of the ubiquity of the concept. you know. And so, this is why this is important to go into this. Some people will say, well, the universe isn't conscious. Well, if the universe isn't conscious and we don't have a free will, how do we explain human consciousness? Because it's not our consciousness. If we don't have a free will, it certainly can't be on our consciousness. So then, to what do we ascribe it to?
Well, see, here's where it gets interesting because obviously things can like we say, things can happen without consciousness being required, cause and effect, physics or whatever, gravity. Um, but as we know, of course, we are conscious and that we're aware of things we're doing, even though we're not the author of those things because we don't have a free will and we're caused to do what we do. But this is where it gets freaky because what we're basically saying is that whatever the case may be, we may not have the explanations for why things happen, but there is nonetheless very little difference in when a human does something or when a tornado blows something down. They're both a causal process, and just because we don't know the mechanism for why a natural disaster happened or why why some big bang happened or supposedly, just because we don't know why something happened, it doesn't mean that it's not happening and that we're not aware of it.
All right, let's focus back on randomness, because this is like, um, so randomness. People say that randomness. Sometimes people, I had somebody in my meetup earlier today just say that, like, I mean, the guy was actually wrong. He's saying, like, if you flip a coin, you can't predict whether it's going to land heads or tails. Actually, you can. If you had the precise enough, machinery, technology, you can predict it exactly. But but the idea, people say that, like, because you can't predict things, because things, we have to rely on probabilities to basically predict certain phenomenon, like, quantum phenomenon, that somehow this lack of predictability just justifies or describes a kind of randomness. It doesn't. I mean, like, that what people are confusing is, like, this mechanism, this mathematical method of predicting that relies on probability equations and all. They're confusing that with the actual behavior of particles, of matter. I mean, matter does not behave probabilistically. It never does, never can. We humans invoke probabilities, mathematical probabilities, to predict the behavior of this matter that is behaving completely causally, completely governed by the law of cause and effect.
Well, yeah, it's basically a confusion of what is and what we know. And people with this unpredictability nonsense, they're basically saying that it's random because they can't predict it, because they don't know the details of how something happens. Then they just assume, oh, well, there's no reason it happened, therefore there's nothing for me to have to learn. So basically, it's a willingness to remain ignorant. It's basically laziness in a sense.
Chandler, listen, I just posted this article. I know it's only 23 minutes into it, but people are beginning to respond like, the iron is hot, dude. I got to respond to this stuff. So let's put an end. Let's finish this podcast. And I'm not sure what we'll talk about tomorrow, but I really got to address this. This is, hopefully this is another post that can go into the thousands of shares, and it really is important. I should be devoting my some attention to this.
Oh, okay. So you just want me to kind of end this episode and then you can get back to that?
Yeah, I've really got to do this, Chandler. I mean, like, again, people are beginning to respond, and the more time that goes without my responding, the less interest people have in it. And this is the time where, like, people being interested in the diary is very important. So,
All right. Well, that sounds good then. I think we've talked for a good time about randomness anyway. Okay. You've been listening to Free Will, Science, and Religion with Chandler Klebs and George Ortega, and we were talking about randomness and what nonsense it is to say that things are really happening for no reason. It's more of a problem of ignorance about us not knowing why something happens. but it's a common myth that persists, and so we'll talk about it on this podcast from time to time. So I hope you enjoy listening to this, and stay tuned for more future episodes. Thank you for listening, and goodbye.